Month continues this October. Talking of which, it's a month that provides an opportunity to learn about some of the icons of the past. But what relevance do they have for Black British communities living in cities like Nottingham in the year 2014? Well, historian Peter Ling is Professor of American Studies at the University of Nottingham, and throughout this month he's giving a series of local talks exploring the life and legacy of Martin Luther King. Peter, lovely to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
Tell us a bit about this Black History Month series of talks. What made you want to do it?
Well, I think the main thing was that I thought King was being misremembered and misrepresented in a lot of ways, and that he was being made safe. And actually, he was a radical figure with a message about action that was being lost and had a real relevance to Black History Month. And I also wanted to go out from the university and talk in the community, because I don't think we do that enough. The campus can seem a bit removed from the community, so we need to come out and talk to people in their own communities.
Talking of which, you're leading this series of talks at ACNA, at the ACNA Centre in St Anne's, started last weekend, continued this weekend and again next weekend. So far, what sort of response have you had from the audience?
I had some really good questions tonight about all the different ways in which they were thinking about, you know, is it the case that in Black communities the preacher has a particular role and you assume that's the person who might be having leadership? Or, you know, people were asking questions about non-violence, about in the sense of, was King just following Gandhi? Was he kind of copying Gandhi's methods? And how did that affect the way he approached things? So some really interesting contributions from the community.
Martin Luther King obviously is one of the many names you'll hear a lot about in Black History Month. Why do you think it's so important, given that there are so many other icons you could have focused on, to focus on Martin Luther King with this series of talks?
Well, like I say, I think that at the moment, non-violence is actually a message that's being lost. That we're actually in a period where violence and violent protest and violent uprisings are grabbing the headlines all over the world. Whereas non-violent protest seems to be something that has lost its relevance in contemporary struggles. And King was very insistent that it was a sword that heals. It was something that could actually make a real difference in the world. And so I'd like people to reevaluate how non-violent protest can make a contribution to social justice.
Is it as important today as it was when Martin Luther King was speaking all those years ago?
I think it's certainly important that we address the issues of injustice, and there are conflicts that we have to face, and if we don't face them non-violently and face them violently, we often make those conflicts worse, and time again, violence seems like the solution. We go to war, and actually it makes the situation so much worse than it was before.
Considering the sorts of topics that have been discussed at this series of talks you're giving at the ACNA Centre in St Anne's, talking about how Martin Luther King might have responded to present-day struggles, things like Ferguson, the riots recently, or President Obama's response to what's happening in Syria at the moment. What sort of messages do you think people can take from the way Martin Luther King might have dealt with these situations?
I mean, I think it's striking that, you know, Barack Obama gets the Nobel Peace Prize and he has to reference in his own speech the fact that he's going to take a very different line than Martin Luther King does. Martin Luther King would have been very critical of Barack Obama as president because of his tendency to rely on tactical military precision technology. So the drone wars that Obama has been fighting, there seems to have been a slippage because of Republican pressures on him to go that way rather than to be proud of what he began with, which was a more diplomatic and multifaceted response. So Martin would have been reminding him that the people who die when America drops their bombs are human beings and God's children too.
With so many icons that you could have focused on, and in Black History Month, the criticism that I hear often on this programme, that we talk a lot about African American activists and not Black British ones. What do you think about that?
I think there's some truth to that. I think actually we have failed to pay enough attention to Black British icons. I think we don't even hear enough about Marcus Garvey, who is a recognised Black British icon. But more importantly, I think the media, because they have such access to US materials, find it pretty easy to go for those icons. But they had relevance too. When Martin Luther King came to Britain, he was very uncomfortable with its colonial and imperial past and felt that it wasn't doing enough for its minority populations here. So he was a critic of Britain as well. And so we may talk about Martin Luther King, but we have to bring it back to the realities of our life here in Britain.
You're continuing your series of talks next weekend at when and where?
At 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock, I'm going to be talking about Malcolm X and about Stokely Carmichael, both of whom are of Afro-Caribbean lineage, and also then talking about how King is misremembered. You know, the memorial's gone up in Washington, D.C., and when you look at King Day broadcast on American television, it's only the I Have a Dream speech. So King, the radical Democrat who wants to see a guaranteed income for people to support their human rights, his is a voice that's being lost.
That's next Sunday.
Next Sunday, 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock at ACNA in St Anne's.
Fantastic stuff. Best of luck with it, and I wish more academics from universities like the University of Nottingham and Nottingham Trent would do things like this. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Peter Ling, a historian and the professor of American Studies at the University of Nottingham, and that, as you heard, is taking place, the Exploring Martin Luther King series at ACNA on Sunday from 4 o'clock in the afternoon and at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Still to come after